I used to be the private bodyguard for a cold-hearted CEO. For a whole year, I kept my head down, hiding every trace of that rainy night, the night I sold my dignity just to save my mother. Until one day, my daughter Emma ran into the office and casually called him Daddy. I froze. No one prepares you to face the man who once paid you for a night and now turns out to be the biological father of your child. If you think this is just another ordinary family story, then you're dead wrong. Hit subscribe now so you won't miss a single powerful episode from our African family stories, raw, emotional, and unforgettable. Before the truth surfaced, I believed memories were something you could bury forever. Under a sky bruised black by thunderclouds, the rain came like vengeance, hard, wild, relentless. The old rusted roofs of Nyamadua, a forgotten village hidden in the dense embrace of Ghana's southern forest belt, clattered beneath the downpour. The dirt roads had long since turned into rivers of red mud snaking through the quiet huts and makeshift stalls, swallowing footprints, secrets, and sins alike. Inside a dimly lit roadside diner, no larger than a classroom, its walls stained by years of smoke grease and whispers. A young woman stood behind the counter, her arms moving like clockwork despite the ache in her joints. Her name was Lena, and the storm outside had nothing on the one she carried in her chest. 24 years old and already hardened by life's unkind hands. Lena was the kind of woman people underestimated until she opened her mouth or didn't. She didn't talk much, didn't complain, didn't waste time on dreams. She wiped tables, stirred pepper stew, carried crates twice her weight, and smiled with the kind of grace that could only come from someone who knew pain too well and too long. Her skin glistened with sweat and rain, her braided hair tucked neatly beneath a faded scarf, and her eyes, those dark, alert eyes, had long forgotten how to hope. In the corner of the diner, through the smoke of roasting tilapia and boiling groundnut soup, sat an older woman wrapped in layers of cloth. A light wool hat pulled low over thinning gray hair. Her name was Mam Efwa Lena's mother, once a midwife known in 3 villages, now reduced to silence. Her breath shallow, her hands trembling with each spoonful of rice she tried to lift. Heart failure, they said. The slow kind. The cruel kind. The kind that tightened its grip when life got too loud or too heavy. Every evening, after the lunch crowd faded and the dusk threatened to swallow the jungle whole, Lena would walk her mother back home through the mud, change her clothes, prepare her herbal tea, and massage her legs until sleep came. That was their ritual, their world, small, predictable, fragile. But that night, oh that night, the storm had begun before dusk, creeping over the canopy like a curse. By 6 p.m., the diner was almost empty, just a few tired laborers, nursing cheap drinks and plates of fufu. Lena stood by the cooking fire, flipping yams, when she noticed the way her mother's breath hitched. Subtle at first. A short inhale, then a longer pause. Then Malina called barely above a whisper, her voice already trembling. No answer. She asked again, crossing the floor in 2 steps. Mama Yafua's spoon slipped from her hand. Her body stiffened, then sagged to the left. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. The entire diner fell silent. Even the storm outside seemed to hush. "Somebody help me!" Lena cried out, voice cracked open by fear. 2 men rushed over, lifting the woman with care, one of them shouting directions as the other searched for Lena's sandals. "We need to go now." "The clinic's still open," a third voice yelled from outside. The next 15 minutes were a blur, mud sloshing under Lena's feet as she held her mother's hand in the back of a borrowed tricycle taxi, praying under her breath in Twi English Yu, whatever language heaven might hear fastest. The small roadside clinic was full of coughing children and pregnant women when Lena burst in screaming. They took her mother in immediately. Lena sat alone in the hallway, soaked through to the bone, arms wrapped around herself like armor. Every 5 minutes, she rose and peered through the curtain, only to be sent back with a glance or a wave. Finally, a nurse emerged. Young, tired, kind enough to sit beside her. "She's stable but not safe." the nurse said, rubbing her hands together. Her heart's failing. She needs surgery. You have to take her to the general hospital in the city. Lena blinked. Surgery? What kind? The nurse inhaled slowly, choosing her words. They'll explain it better there. But it's urgent. How much? Lena asked. The nurse hesitated. With transport, admission labs, the surgery, and 3 days stay. Around 12,000 cedis. Maybe more. Lena felt her body go cold, not from the rain, but from the number itself. It might as well have been 1 million. I don't have that, she whispered. The nurse looked at her gently. Then you'll have to find it. Fast. They allowed Mame Efua to rest a few hours more, while paperwork was prepared. Lena stood outside under the corrugated roof, watching the rain fall in steady, cruel sheets. Her phone battery was nearly dead. The only contact in it who might help her father's half-brother in Kumasi hadn't spoken to them in years. And even if she called, he would hang up faster than the dial tone could catch up. She scrolled through her messages, hoping for a miracle. A forgotten savings account. A government aid text. Anything. Nothing. The villagers had always said Lena was cursed. That her beauty came at the price of her family's fortune. That her mother's illness was a punishment for secrets untold. But Lena knew the truth. She wasn't cursed. Just poor. And in Nyamadua, being poor was the same as being invisible. She re-entered the clinic, knelt by her mother's cot, and held her hand tightly. I'll find a way, Ma, she whispered, forehead pressed to her mother's palm. I swear it. But even as she said it, the words felt like lies. At midnight, the rain hadn't stopped. The nurse came by with forms to transfer Mame Efua to the city hospital. Lena stared at the page, but didn't sign. The nurse gave her a look, something between pity and worry, then walked away. And that's when she saw him. He stood at the edge of the hallway, half shadowed by the flickering fluorescent light. Tall, wrapped in a navy trench coat despite the heat, his umbrella dripping onto the tiles. His skin was a lighter shade of brown, likely from the coast or the city. His shoes black leather, Italian cut. His watch gold. His eyes piercing, unreadable. He watched Lena with a calm intensity that unsettled her. As if he knew her. As if he had been waiting. She stood slowly. He didn't move. You're Lena, he said. His voice was low. Polished. Educated. Yes, she replied defensively. I know someone who knows someone, he said vaguely, then added. They told me about your mother. About what you need. Lena's heart raced. Who are you? He smiled just enough to be unsettling. A man with money. And a proposal. I'm not a beggar, Lena snapped. I didn't say you were. They stood in silence. Rain hammered the windows. I'll pay for everything, he said finally. All of it. Surgery. Stay. Transport. Lena narrowed her eyes. What? He shrugged casual. Let's just say, I believe in trading desperation for opportunity. She wanted to slap him. To scream. To demand a straight answer. But then the thought of her mother's chest, heaving for breath, snapped through her. What do you want? She asked, her voice hollow. He didn't blink. One night. Silence fell like an axe between them. One night he repeated. No names, no faces, no stories, no future. Lena swallowed hard. Her fists clenched. Her stomach turned. No one has to know, he said softer now. Just you and me. One night. Then you walk away. With your mother alive. And just like that, the storm outside grew louder. Or maybe it just finally matched the storm inside her. She didn't speak. She just nodded once. The man walked out the door. Lena followed. Under the dim fluorescent light of the clinic's outer hallway, Lena stood in silence, her fingers trembling slightly around the transfer form she still hadn't signed. The paper was damp from the condensation of the storm rolling on through the night. Her mother lay unconscious in the ward, behind her still breathing, still fighting. But the clock was ticking. The rain had slowed to a cruel rhythm, more whisper than roar now, as if mocking her. The kind of rain that didn't offer cover, only time. Time to think, to panic, to drown in thoughts you couldn't tell anyone. The kind of rain that reminded you you were alone. The man from earlier, he hadn't said much, hadn't needed to. His proposal hung in the air like smoke, thick, clinging, impossible to forget. One night, no names, no faces, no future. She'd walked outside after him into the rain, her mind spiraling with every step. He hadn't even waited beneath the canopy of the clinic. He just stood out in the open water, drenching his coat like it meant nothing. When she caught up, he turned slowly, as if he'd known she'd follow. "I don't even know who you are," Lena said, her voice strained but steady. "You don't need to," he replied. His tone was cool, not unkind, but distant, in a way that made it clear he'd done this sort of thing before. He gestured to a parked SUV, sleek and black, its windows tinted like secrets. "I just need your answer, now." She stood still. The air was thick with mud and gasoline. Her throat tightened. She wasn't naive. She'd grown up in a village where girls disappeared and came back broken, or didn't come back at all. She had made it this far because she didn't make stupid decisions. But this wasn't about pride. This wasn't about stupidity. This was a choice between a life and a grave. What kind of man makes this kind of offer to a woman standing over her dying mother, she asked, biting every word like a curse. "A man who understands the weight of desperation," he said. That answer. That damn answer. It cracked something in her. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. She hated how calm he was, how unaffected, as if her life, her very soul, was just another negotiation. He opened the passenger door and stepped back. "I have a place 10 minutes from here," he said. Quiet, clean, discreet. She stared at the car. Its interior glowed faintly with soft blue lights. Luxurious leather seats. A bottle of imported water in the cup holder. This man didn't belong here. Not in this world. Not in her world. Still, her legs moved. She slid into the passenger seat, the door clicking shut behind her like a verdict. The scent inside the car, woodsy cologne and leather, wrapped around her like a net. Neither of them spoke on the drive. The rain drummed against the windshield. Her heart beat louder than it ever had, but on the outside she was still. Stone. She wouldn't let him see her crack. The house was tucked behind a wall of bougainvillea, gated and silent. A modern villa, white walls, flat roof, warm yellow lights glowing from within. Not a single sign of life except for the housekeeper, who opened the gate with a nod and then vanished. He led her inside without touching her, without speaking. The living room was minimalist. White marble, a piano, bookshelves filled with leather-bound titles she couldn't pronounce. This wasn't just a man with money. This was a man with old money, generational money, the kind of money that didn't blink. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey. She declined with a shake of her head. Upstairs, the guest room was already prepared. Not sensual, not romantic, clinical. The bed was king-sized. Clean sheets, fresh towels folded like hotel linen. The air smelled of lavender and disinfectant. He didn't rush her. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap, staring down at her chipped nails. She thought about her mother, about the wheezing. The doctor's voice. 12,000 CDs. 12,000 reasons to go through with this. She thought about being a child again. About how Mame Afua would braid her hair and whisper, "Even if the world spits on you, you walk tall. You were not born for shame." Shame. What a cruel thing. "I need to shower," she said finally. He nodded, pointing her toward the ensuite bathroom. Inside, Lena locked the door and stood before the mirror. She didn't recognize the woman looking back. Pale from fear, lips cracked from dehydration, eyes bloodshot from crying too many silent tears. She turned the water on hot, let it scald her shoulders, scrubbed her skin like she could wash away the choices she hadn't even made yet. When she stepped out, a white robe had been left on the hook. She put it on. It was thick, soft, like the robe wasn't meant for women like her. He was already on this bed, shirtless, barefoot, sitting upright as if waiting for a business meeting to start. "Do you want to talk first?" he asked, voice flat. "No," she said. She dropped the robe without flourish. Her hands didn't tremble. Her eyes didn't blink. She moved to the bed and climbed in next to him like a soldier entering a battlefield. And then nothing. Not passion, not seduction, just transaction. An agreement carried out with the mechanical detachment of two people who understood the rules. No lingering touches, no kisses, no names. Afterward, he stood, picked up his watch from the nightstand, and walked out without a word. Lena lay in the bed alone. The sheets smelled like rain and regret. It wasn't until she heard the front door click shut that she allowed herself to cry. Not the soft, cinematic kind of tears. These were deep sobs, animal violent. She curled into herself, pressing her fists into her stomach like she could squeeze the pain out physically. She felt hollow, like her soul had been extracted and left behind in that bed. When she finally got dressed and left the house at dawn, the housekeeper handed her an envelope. Thick, heavy. Inside was cash. Enough to pay for her mother's surgery, her post-op care, and more. There was no note, no number, no name. Lena walked back to her room in the village as the sun began to rise behind the trees. The birds were starting to sing. The world was beginning again. But she felt like something had ended. She sat on the wooden floor of her rented room, peeling walls, cracked window. Her mother's empty medicine bottles scattered near the bed, and she wept. Not because she regretted saving her mother's life, but because the part of herself that always believed in light had died in the dark. Under the blinding noon sun of Accra, the city pulsed with a heartbeat Lena had never known before. It was loud, unapologetic. Smog and ambition hung in the air like competing scents. Hawkers yelled, trotros honked, and the skyline shimmered with glass towers that seemed to mock the earth with their arrogance. Lena stood outside a small apartment block just off Nema Road. Her arms wrapped around the little girl clinging to her waist like she was an anchor. 6 years had passed since the night that had broken something inside her, but it hadn't destroyed her. No. She had rebuilt. Quietly. Brick by aching brick. And the strongest brick of all was Emma. "Are you sure this is our new home?" Emma asked, her big brown eyes darting up to the peeling cream paint of the apartment wall. "Yes, baby. It's not much now, but we'll make it beautiful," Lena replied, brushing sweat from her temple. She always smiled when Emma was around, even when she wanted to cry. Their unit was on the 3rd floor. No elevator. Just chipped stairs and a rusty railing that groaned when you leaned too hard. Inside, the space was modest. A tiny kitchen, 1 bedroom, a living area big enough for a mat and small wooden table. But it was theirs. It smelled like promise. They slept on the same mattress the first night. Emma curled into Lena's arms, thumb tucked near her mouth, whispering her usual question into the silence. "Mama, when will Daddy come back from the stars?" Lena closed her eyes. "Soon, my love. He watches you every night. That's why you dream so beautifully." Emma didn't ask much more. She never pushed. But Lena could see it how her daughter studied the faces of men on the street. How she asked other kids about their fathers. How her little hands gripped the drawing pencil tighter when sketching imaginary men with capes or crowns. Lena always watched in silence, her chest aching with both love and guilt. But life didn't wait. Rent was due. Food had to be bought. And Emma needed school fees. Accra wasn't kind to the poor, but it tolerated the useful. Lena, with her athletic build and calm, calculating eyes, had already found part-time work doing private home security. It didn't pay much, but it built her name. One evening, while escorting a client to a wedding in East Legon, a man approached her, mid-40s, clean-cut, silver watch. "You used to train in Kumasi, right?" he asked. Lena raised an eyebrow. "Depends who's asking." "I'm a talent scout. Corporate security. One of our clients is looking for a personal protection officer. Someone discreet. Tough. Clean background." Lena didn't hesitate. "Where?" "Able Group, the main office. Interviews next Tuesday." She went home that night and looked it up on a borrowed phone. Able Group. One of the largest tech conglomerates in West Africa. Offices in 5 countries. Known for their ruthless CEO. A man never photographed. Never interviewed, never seen outside boardrooms or the shadows of international deals. Lena didn't care. She'd faced worse than shadows. On Tuesday morning, she left Emma with her neighbor. Braided her hair into a tight bun, slipped into her black trousers and white blouse, and took 2 trotros to Ridge. The Able Group tower loomed like a silver sword stabbed into the city. All glass sharp-angle security cameras on every corner. She stood for a moment at the base, watching the reflection of the sky ripple down its surface. At the reception, she introduced herself. Lena Mensa, here for the PPO position. The receptionist barely looked up. Take the elevator to the 16th floor, room 1605. No waiting room, no pleasantries. Inside, a slim woman in a navy blazer met her with a clipboard and zero warmth. Experience, the woman asked, pen poised. 3 years in private home security. 1 year at Maban Security Solutions. Trained in Kumasi under Lieutenant Obeng. Black belt judo, basic tactical training. No criminal record. The woman blinked. You're overqualified. Why apply here? Lena didn't flinch. Because your CEO is apparently impossible to deal with. You need someone who doesn't get scared easy. The woman actually smirked. Fair point. 30 minutes later, Lena was standing outside again, the interview already fading behind her. It had gone too fast. No one asked about her personal life. No background check on the spot. Just a clipped, "We'll be in touch." She figured she wouldn't hear back. But the next morning a call came. You start Monday, the voice said. 7:30 a.m. Uniform provided. No lateness tolerated. She didn't smile until she hung up. Then she screamed. Emma ran into the room, still holding a piece of bread. We got the job, Mama. We did, baby, Lena said, swinging her up in her arms. We did. Monday arrived like thunder. Lena woke at 5 a.m., braided her hair with precision, laid out. Emma's breakfast, packed her lunch, kissed her forehead, and whispered blessings into her ears. Emma waved from the balcony as Lena disappeared into the rising light. The office floor she was assigned to was sparse polished marble floors, long corridors, frosted glass. Every sound echoed. A single security officer showed her the orientation room, her locker, and the control station. By 8:15, she was on the 28th floor executive level. Her first assignment, guarding the private entrance to the CEO's office. Has he arrived? She asked another guard. The man chuckled. He's always here. You just don't see him. She raised an eyebrow. He comes in through the underground garage. Private elevator. Nobody talks to him directly unless summoned. Does he have a name? The man gave her a strange look. Of course. Ethan Quay. But people just call him Sir if they see him at all. Her stomach turned at the name. Ethan. It was probably coincidence. Ghana had hundreds of Ethans. Still, something crawled up her spine. Over the next week, she memorized her patrol routes, floor plans, emergency procedures. She watched. Listened. Never missed a step. No one ever saw the CEO. Doors opened and closed. Papers appeared, but no sightings. Then, on a Thursday evening, as she stood outside his office, waiting for shift change, the elevator pinged behind her. She turned instinctively, professional posture, locked. A tall figure stepped out. She only saw him for half a second, maybe less. His face obscured by the shadow of the elevator's internal light. But something in the tilt of his head, the set of his shoulders, something struck her in the gut like a hammer. He paused for a heartbeat, looked her way, then kept walking. No words, no nod, just a glance. But it was enough, because in that single moment, her blood ran cold. That walk, that silence, that presence, it was him. She didn't have proof, but her body knew what her mind didn't dare accept. The man from 6 years ago, the one who'd bought her shame, the father of her child, the CEO she was now sworn to protect. Ethan. They called him the Ice King, not because he was cruel, not exactly, but because Ethan Quay was a man untouched. Untouched by small talk, by sentiment, by the sun even. Most of his staff had never seen him smile. Fewer had ever seen him twice. He operated like a system, cold, precise, unflinching. You didn't meet Ethan. You received his signature. He inherited the Able Group from his father 6 years ago, not long after a mysterious car accident left him hospitalized and half silent for months. Rumors said he lost more than just control of the wheel that night. Some claimed a piece of his memory vanished too. He dismissed the whispers publicly, but those closest knew better. There were gaps, chunks of weeks Ethan couldn't recall, and he didn't try to. "I don't live in the past," he'd told his board. "It doesn't pay dividends." He hadn't been the same since. He rarely attended events, skipped press appearances, and declined interviews. The media adored trying to unravel his enigma, but Ethan simply refused to play the game. He stayed in his fortress of blue glass and metal-wielding power like a blade. His office on the 28th floor resembled a command center more than a workplace surveillance screens. Black-tinted glass, minimalist furniture in shades of gray and blue. No family photos, no awards, just function and silence. Lena learned this firsthand. Her first real encounter with Ethan came unexpectedly. She'd been at her post outside his office one Monday morning when the door swung open without warning. "Follow me," was all he said. She blinked. "Sir." He didn't repeat himself, just turned and began walking. She followed, down the executive corridor past meeting rooms and restricted doors, through the service elevator, and down into the logistics floor, a place she'd never been. There he stopped before a locked inventory vault. "This area has been breached twice in the last 4 months, he said, not looking at her. Lena took in the blinking security panel, the distorted camera feed above them. "You want me to secure it? I want you to live inside it, if that's what it takes," he replied flatly. "Fix it. Monitor it. I don't care how." That was how it began. Task after task, each one more difficult than the last. Floor access rewrites, threat simulations, anonymous incident reviews. Ethan never explained why she, a new PPO, was being trusted with internal risk protocols. He just kept calling for her, assigning her things others weren't allowed to touch. The other guards began to whisper. "He likes her. He's testing her. He's trying to break her." None of them were completely wrong. For Lena, every task from Ethan felt like walking through fire, because every second she spent near him, her body reacted with a silent scream. "He's the one. That's him." But he never looked at her like he recognized her, not once. That was worse than being hated, because if he didn't remember, it meant that night had meant nothing. And her daughter Emma was just a footnote in a life he no longer recalled. It burned her, quietly. Ethan, meanwhile, was haunted by something he couldn't name. He didn't understand it at first. Why the sound of Lena's boots behind him made him flinch. Why her voice, calm, low, unshaken, felt like a déjà vu he couldn't place. Why when she entered a room the air changed. He studied her when she wasn't looking. The way she scanned a room in one sweep. The way her jaw tightened when someone interrupted her. The way she didn't flinch under pressure. He admired her. And yet, there was something else. Familiar, like music you forgot you loved. He found himself assigning her more just to watch her work, just to have her near. One Thursday, the silence broke. She had just returned from inspecting the East Wing surveillance logs. "You disarmed the internal breach alarm without using the secondary access code," he said, scanning her report. "I bypassed it," Lena replied. He looked up. "You bypassed my firewall." "Wasn't hard," she said. Silence. Then, a smirk, the first one she'd seen on his face. "You're dangerous," he said. "Only to systems with flaws," she replied without blinking. He handed her another file. "No one's lasted longer than 3 months in this role," he said. "I'm not most people." That's when he knew. He didn't just admire her. He was drawn to her, though he would never admit it. Later that week, everything cracked open. It was the day Emma visited the tower. It wasn't supposed to happen. Lena's neighbor had an emergency, and Emma had nowhere to go. Lena had begged her supervisor for permission to keep the child in the break room for 1 hour while she finished a report. "I'll bring her upstairs quietly," she said. "She won't leave my sight." Emma was quiet. Always had been. In the waiting lounge, she colored in her sketchbook with complete focus. She wore her yellow sundress and white sandals, her big girl outfit. But the door had been left slightly ajar. And children are curious. Ethan stepped into the hallway just as Emma tiptoed out her sketchbook tucked under her arm. They nearly collided. "Oh, sorry, sir," she said quickly, looking up. Ethan looked down. She had his eyes. For the briefest second, he froze. Something pierced him right behind the rib cage. The girl blinked. "You okay, mister?" He blinked back. Yes, he said slower than usual. Emma tilted her head. You look like my drawings, but colder. He chuckled before he could stop himself. Is that so? She nodded. Mama says some people wear coldness like a suit. I think you're one of them. That made him laugh, out loud. For the first time in months, before he could ask her anything else, Lena appeared. Emma, the child turned. Mama, he's funny. Ethan's eyes met Lena's. For a second, the air left the hallway. Lena stepped between them. Sir, I apologize. This won't happen again. She's yours, he asked. Lena nodded. Yes. He looked at Emma once more, then turned and walked away. Later in his office, Ethan stared at his desk, fingers tapping. That little girl's face haunted him. Those eyes, that voice, that instinct. He reached into his drawer, pulled out an old journal, and flipped to the back page. There, scrawled in his own handwriting 6 years ago, were 4 words: rain, shadows, her voice. He closed the book and whispered, Who are you really, Lena? The morning sun filtered through the dusty blinds, casting broken stripes of gold across the bare floorboards. Lena stood barefoot in the middle of their new apartment. Sleeves rolled, arms dusted with the fine white powder of paint chips and old plaster. It wasn't much, just another modest rental on the quieter side of Accra, but it was a step forward. The city had its noise, its shadows, its sharp corners. But Lena was used to surviving edges. She was cleaning out the last of the storage crates when her fingers brushed against something buried deep in a fold of an old headscarf. Cold, hard, familiar. She pulled it out slowly. It was the necklace, the one she hadn't seen in 6 years. Carved ivory beads threaded onto a thin red cord. A tiny brass pendant shaped like a fertility gourd hanging from the center. It was a gift from her mother on her 17th birthday. A blessing for protection, womanhood, and truth. Lena had worn it every day until that night. That one night, the night she'd sold herself to save her mother. The night she'd walked out into the rain and into the arms of a stranger. She sat down hard on the floor, the necklace dangling from her trembling fingers. Memory wasn't a straight line. It didn't tap you gently. It hit in waves. The feel of the rain through her blouse, the heat of his hands on her spine. The smell, yes, she could remember it now. Sandalwood, smoke, a trace of something foreign expensive, a cologne she could never name. She pressed the pendant to her chest and closed her eyes. For years she had trained herself to forget, but now the past was rising again. She stood abruptly and tucked the necklace into the back of her drawer, her mind spinning. Later that week, the past whispered again, this time through her daughter. Emma was sitting at the kitchen table, her legs swinging freely beneath her chair, slurping noodles from a bowl. It was an ordinary evening, nothing special. Lena was folding laundry nearby. Then she noticed it. Emma was using chopsticks. Not only that, she was using them with her left hand. Where did you learn that? Lena asked casually. Emma shrugged, eyes still on her bowl. I watched a video. It looked fun. Why your left hand? I don't know. It just feels right. Lena froze. Because that's how Ethan ate too. She'd seen him once at a silent luncheon with foreign investors. The man used chopsticks like a violinist, used a bow, graceful, deliberate, and with his left hand. It had struck her then, but she hadn't thought much of it. People had quirks. Now she wasn't so sure. 2 days later, Lena was doing her evening sweep on the 28th floor when she passed by the empty staff lounge. The door was ajar. Inside, soft notes danced through the airlight, wistful, almost melancholic. It was music, a wooden flute. She stepped in quietly. Ethan was standing by the window alone, holding a handcrafted wooden flute. Not one of the fancy ones you'd find in upscale music stores, but the kind carved by local artisans in the northern villages. The sound it produced was unmistakably traditional, high-pitched, and earthy. She watched in silence as he played a short melody. Then he stopped, turned and saw her. He didn't speak. Neither did she. He placed the flute down slowly on a side table and raised an eyebrow. I didn't know anyone else was here, he said. I was just passing by. He nodded, but there was tension in his jaw like he hadn't meant to be seen in that moment. She gestured toward the flute. Where did you learn that? Ethan looked at it for a beat too long. My mother's old housekeeper used to play it. I picked it up. Lena gave a tight nod. It's rare to hear something like that here. It helps me think, he said. then added after a pause, or forget. That word, forget. It landed too hard. That night, Lena sat awake long after Emma had fallen asleep. Her thoughts raced in loops. Chopsticks, left-handed, the flute, the cologne, the timing. Ethan had admitted in a meeting once that his memory wasn't perfect. A car accident 6 years ago. Weeks unaccounted for. Gaps. That's when Emma was conceived. Her heart beat so loudly, it felt like it would wake the whole building. She paced the room, then returned to her drawer and pulled out the necklace again. Her hands clenched around it. It couldn't be. It could. She stared at her daughter's sleeping face, so peaceful, so unaware of the storm churning in her mother's chest. That same night, on the other side of the city, Ethan woke up from another dream. He sat upright in bed, sweat sticking to his chest, breath shallow. Same dream, again. Always the same. Rain, a blurred face, her voice. Not the words, never the words, but the tone, the warmth, the softness, laced with pain. He didn't remember what happened that night, only fragments. But the dream always felt real. Too real. He rose from bed and walked to the large windows of his apartment, looking out across the city's lights. In the distance, the clouds hung low, heavy, with unshed rain. The air smelled like something coming, and he couldn't shake it anymore. There was something about Lena, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck rise when she entered a room. Something that made him notice the necklace she sometimes wore under her blouse, the glimpse of brass when she bent down, the whisper of ivory beads when she moved too fast. Something that pulled him closer without consent. He returned to his desk, opened a leather-bound journal, and flipped to the page where he'd scrawled his memories during rehab 6 years ago. He had written, storm, ivory, her breath, her scent. He touched the ink with the tip of his finger. Ivory, a necklace. Was it possible? He stared out the window again, eyes scanning the horizon like it could give him an answer. Back in her room, Lena reached for her phone and scrolled to Emma's baby pictures. She pulled up a photo from the day Emma first laughed. Her nose crinkled, her eyes squinted, and in that moment she didn't look like Lena. She looked like someone else entirely, like him. Lena pressed her forehead to the screen and exhaled a shuddered breath. She didn't want it to be true, because if it was, everything she'd buried was about to rise, and there would be no hiding left, no turning back, no denying fate. It started with a single hair. Lena hadn't planned it. She hadn't intended to cross that final line between suspicion and proof. But sometimes instinct is louder than conscience, and hers was screaming. It happened one evening after hours on the 28th floor of Able Group headquarters. Ethan had left in a hurry, summoned to an emergency shareholders meeting downtown. Lena had been asked to retrieve a document file he left behind in his private conference room, a room no one else was allowed into. She entered carefully, aware that stepping into his space felt almost like trespassing. The room smelled like him, sandalwood smoke and something crisp and expensive she could never name. Everything was tidy, unnaturally so. Leather chairs, brushed steel surfaces, a single faintly stained coffee mug on the table. She picked up the file from the far end of the table. But as she turned to leave, something caught her eye. A single strand of hair, clinging to the back of his chair, almost glowing under the sharp halogen lights. Short, dark brown, still holding a bit of a wave. It wasn't hers. It wasn't long enough to belong to any of the other staff. And it felt like fate. Her hand reached out slowly. She pinched the strand between 2 fingers, slipped it into a small Ziploc she kept in her security belt, protocol for evidence normally. Not this time. That night she didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her bed, watching Emma breathe, her daughter's chest rising and falling with the calm innocence only children could possess. 6 years of memories flickered like a film reel in her mind. Emma's first step, her first word, her first fever. The quiet nights Lena cried alone while pretending to be twice as strong by day. She didn't want this. Didn't want to upend the fragile stability she had fought so hard to build. But the not knowing was worse. It was unbearable. And somewhere inside she knew that even if she tried to bury the truth, it would claw its way out eventually. The next day she paid a visit to a discreet clinic on the edge of Osu. A friend from her old job had once mentioned it, used by politicians and diplomats, who didn't want anything traced. She told the receptionist she needed a paternity test. "I have the child's sample," Lena said, "and a possible match." They didn't ask questions. For a fee, they never did. She handed them Emma's used toothbrush in a sealed plastic sleeve. Then from her pocket, the strand of hair. "Rush it," she said. The nurse gave her a look. "It's urgent," Lena added. 3 days came the reply. 3 days to know. 3 days to wonder if the man she reported to every morning, the man who looked at her like she was a riddle wrapped in fire, was her daughter's father. She walked out of the clinic with lead in her stomach. What she didn't know was that across town, Ethan Quay was holding a photograph. He had received it that morning, delivered in a sealed envelope with no return address. Inside was a candid shot of Lena and Emma walking hand in hand through Macola Market. Emma was licking a popsicle, eyes shining. Lena was mid-laugh. Ethan stared at the image for a long time. There it was again, that feeling, a tightening in his throat, a pressure behind his ribs. That child. She looked like him. The way she squinted when the sun hit her face, the slant of her jaw, the stubborn furrow between her brows. He tried to dismiss it. Coincidence. Projection. But the seed had been planted weeks ago, ever since that hallway moment when the little girl had looked up at him and said, "You look like my drawings." But colder. She had his voice, not in tone, in tempo, in defiance. It shook him. That morning he had called in a favor. A man named Kojo. Private investigator, ex-police, trusted. "I need a background check," Ethan had said. "On one of my employees." Kojo didn't flinch. Name, Lena Mensah. And her daughter. He sent over the photograph. Kojo didn't ask more. Within hours, he was combing through hospital records, residency logs, social media footprints, school enrollment files. Quiet. Thorough. 2 days later, Kojo returned with more than Ethan had expected. She has no listed partner. No record of the father. But he slid a manila folder across the table. "The child's birth date lines up suspiciously close with the period of your accident, when you went off-grid for several weeks after the crash." Ethan's face tightened. Kojo continued tapping on the final page. "I took the liberty of comparing facial geometry. I had my guy run analysis, eyes, jawline, nasal bridge. You're not going to like this." Ethan flipped the page. Side by side, his image and the child's. Digital overlays, matching markers, a 92% probability of biological relation. He didn't breathe for several seconds. It was like the ground had opened under his feet and refused to close. He remembered the night vaguely. The crash, the hospital, the weeks of fog. But before the accident, he had disappeared for one night, gone off the radar. Security logs said he left a gala and never made it home until dawn. No memory of where he'd gone, no explanation. He remembered fragments, rain, skin, a scent like hibiscus and fire. Could it be her? Could it really have been Lena? He looked up at Kojo, eyes dark. "I need a DNA test. Quiet. Just confirm it. Her and me." Kojo nodded. Already sent it in. Ethan stared at the photograph again. Emma laughing with her mother. A moment so intimate it felt like trespassing. He swallowed hard. 3 days passed. Lena received her results on a Thursday afternoon. She sat alone in the back stairwell of Able Group's parking garage, hands gripping the sealed envelope. Her palms were damp. Her heart threatened to punch through her ribs. She opened it slowly. The words stared back at her like they'd been waiting. Probability of paternity, 99.7%. She had to reread it. Twice. Then again. She didn't cry. Not yet. She just sat there, still, numb. Ethan Quay was the father of her daughter, and he didn't know. At least, she thought he didn't. An hour later, Ethan received his own results. Delivered via encrypted email, password protected, verified through 2-step authentication. He opened the document. There was no question. Emma Mensah was his child. The world around him slowed. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Lena had known all this time. Or had she? No, she couldn't have been sure. Not until now. And now she knew, just as he did. They were standing at the edge of the same truth, facing each other through silence. And the question that lingered in the space between them wasn't the result. It was who would speak first. Who would break the glass? Because whoever did the world they had built of professionalism distance control would shatter, and whatever came after would be irreversible. It was just past 6:00 p.m. when Lena received the message. Come to conference room 28A now. No greeting, no name. But she knew who it was. She stood outside the glass-paneled room for a full minute before pushing the door open. Ethan stood inside back to her, looking out at the bleeding skyline of Accra. His hands were in his pockets. The orange hues of the setting sun cast harsh lines on his face, exaggerating the sharp angles, the tight jaw, the tension rolling off him like heat. He didn't turn around. You knew, he said quietly. Lena didn't answer. He turned slowly, eyes narrowing. You knew, Lena. She stood her ground. Not until recently. You ran a DNA test. Her throat tightened. So did you. He gave a dry laugh, humorless, sharp. So we both played the same game. Except you played it for 6 years. I played it for 3 days. Silence stretched. Then he said it, flat, direct. She's mine. No. Her voice cut like glass. She's mine. You don't get to say that. I do. I carried her. I raised her. I gave up everything for her. You also kept her from me. You were never supposed to be in her life. His eyes widened, stunned. You don't mean that. I do. She was trembling now. You think I didn't want her to have a father? You think I didn't pray for some miracle where I'd find someone who'd love her like their own? I am her father. No, she snapped, voice cracking. You're just a man who forgot, who left. You don't even remember that night, do you? Ethan flinched. The words hit harder than he'd anticipated. I remember enough, he said. Rain, skin, a voice that made everything else go quiet. I didn't know it was you, but I've been dreaming of you for years. Lena shook her head, bitter. And what was I supposed to do, Ethan? March into your glass tower and hand you a baby? What would you have done? Denied it, called me a liar, fired me, sued me. I would have stepped up, he said through clenched teeth. No, she whispered. You would have run. Because that's who you were back then. Selfish, detached, drowning in wealth and whiskey. Ethan took a step toward her. Don't stand there and pretend you know me. I know you enough. Another silence. And in that silence, a tiny voice broke through. Mama. Lena's heart dropped. Emma stood in the doorway, her tiny frame backlit by the hallway lights, her eyes wide, confused, scared. I heard shouting, she said. Lena stepped forward, quickly crouching. Emma, baby, it's okay. But the girl wasn't looking at her. She was staring at Ethan. You're the man from the hallway, she said. The one who said I was clever? Ethan knelt. Something cracked inside him. Yes, he said softly. That was me. Emma took a step back, suddenly afraid. Why are you fighting with Mama? Neither adult answered. Emma looked at Lena. Is he my dad? The room froze. Lena opened her mouth, but the words never came. Emma turned and ran. Lena screamed, bolting after her. But the girl was fast. Too fast. She slipped through the side exit and disappeared down the stairwell. Ethan's voice boomed after her. They took the stairs 3 at a time, panic rising. By the time they hit the lobby, she was gone. Rain had begun to fall, thin and bitter. The kind that teased, not quenched. Lena burst through the front doors, scanning the sidewalk. The parked cars, the street vendors packing up under makeshift umbrellas. She couldn't have gone far, Ethan said, breathless. She's 6, Lena shouted. She's scared and alone. They split up. Lena ran down the left side of the building, calling her daughter's name over and over like a prayer. Her voice cracked with desperation. Memories hit her like bricks. Emma's tiny hands clinging to her on the first day of preschool, the way she always asked for extra mango in her porridge, the way she whispered, I love you the most, just before falling asleep. Ethan checked every alley, every shadow, every place a child might hide. His mind raced. Images collided, Emma laughing. Emma frightened, Emma gone. He passed a bus stop, a fruit stand, a man selling umbrellas. Nothing. And then he saw her. Curled beneath the awning of a locked pharmacy, knees pulled to her chest, soaked to the skin. He froze, then approached slowly. Emma, he said gently. She looked up, eyes red, lip trembling. I want my mama. She's coming, he said. She's just down the street. The girl didn't move. Ethan crouched beside her. I'm sorry. She stared at him, eyes too wise for her age. Are you really my dad? His throat tightened. Yes. Her eyes narrowed. Then why did you make Mama cry? He exhaled. Because I was angry and scared, and not very smart. She tilted her head. Mama says when people yell it's 'cause they don't know how to say they're hurt. Ethan smiled despite himself. Your mama's right. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Lena appeared soaked, panting, frantic. Emma, the girl, ran to her. Lena dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around her, holding her so tight it hurt. Don't ever do that again, she whispered into her daughter's damp hair. I'm sorry, Mama. I love you. I love you so much. Behind them, Ethan stood still watching them. Lena turned face wet with more than rain. Her voice was low, raw. This is why I didn't tell you. Ethan didn't argue. I didn't know if you'd care. Or worse, if you'd care too late. He stepped closer. I care now. She shook her head. It's not about now. It's about always. Where were you when she had nightmares, when she got sick, when I couldn't afford medicine and skipped meals so she could eat? I was broken, he said simply. So was I, she shot back. But I didn't have the luxury of forgetting. A long pause. Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. Help me make it right. She looked down at Emma, still clinging to her, then back at him. I don't know if you can. He nodded slowly, accepting the truth. But he also made a silent vow that this was not where their story would end. The next time Ethan saw Emma, it wasn't in a polished office or beneath the flickering glow of emergency lights. It was in the backyard of Lena's new apartment complex, a place far removed from his world of brushed chrome and climate control. There was no valet, no security, no pressurized glass doors. Just cracked pavement, a few mango trees, rusted swings, and the laughter of children who knew how to make magic from nothing. He stood at the gate hesitant. This wasn't his arena. These weren't his rules. And the girl he came to see was crouched in the dirt building something out of sticks and bottle caps, with another child, some kind of market stall maybe. He didn't call her name. He didn't want to startle her. But she saw him, and she froze. So did he. Then slowly she stood. She walked toward him without speaking, her arms folded behind her back like she was holding something invisible. He knelt to her eye level. Hi, he said, his voice a little unsteady. Emma blinked. You look weird in normal clothes. He smiled, relieved by the jab. I get that a lot. She looked over her shoulder, making sure the other kids weren't listening. What do you want? She asked, not unkindly, just cautious. Ethan hesitated, then held up a small bag. It was a cloth pouch, hand-stitched with a drawstring made of kente cloth. I brought something. Emma tilted her head. Is it candy? Better, he said. It's a game. She raised an eyebrow. A phone game? Nope, he replied. An old one, from the villages. My grandmother taught me. He sat down cross-legged right there on the ground, pulled the drawstring open, and spilled out a handful of smooth pebbles. Emma's curiosity overtook her caution. She crept closer, watching his hands. You ever played Ampy before? She nodded. It's for girls. Ethan grinned. Then I better not challenge you, I'll lose. That earned a smile. Okay, he said. How about our? Her eyes lit up. You know how to play Awar. He nodded. You're too fancy for Awar. Try me. They made a board in the sand using bottle caps for pits. Ethan explained the rules again, even though she clearly knew them. He just wanted to talk to stretch the moment. They played 2 rounds. She beat him both times. No mercy, he asked. Nope, she said, popping the pea. Her defenses were dropping. Slowly. But they were dropping. From the second-floor window, Lena watched everything. Her arms were crossed, but her expression was unreadable. She wasn't ready to forgive. But watching Ethan there, barefoot in the dirt, laughing as Emma scolded him for cheating, it tugged at something deep. He wasn't faking it. He didn't even seem to know how to. Later that afternoon, after the game, and after Ethan bought all the kids frozen kenki from the street vendor, Emma sat beside him on the stoop. Her head leaned just slightly against his shoulder. Not quite a hug, but not distance either. My friends think I'm lucky now, she said. Why's that? 'Cause I have a dad. Ethan didn't respond right away. He stared out at the horizon. My dad left when I was 4, he said. Emma turned to him. Why? No one really knows. He just disappeared. Took his briefcase and never came back. My mom said he got tired of pretending to be someone he wasn't. Did it make you sad? Ethan looked down at her, then nodded. For a long time, yes. Emma looked at her fingers, wriggled them. I used to pretend you were watching me. When I learned to ride a bike, I imagined you were there. He blinked fast. That one sentence punched through the armor he didn't even realize he was still wearing. She looked back up. You weren't, though. I know, he said, voice gravel thick, and I'm sorry for that. A long silence passed between them. Then she asked, will you disappear too? He turned fully toward her and gently took her hand, small, warm, curious. No, not ever. She studied him. Even if I get sick or fail math, especially then. Her eyes searched his face. Mama always says love means staying even when it's hard. She's right. They sat in the quiet for a while. Finally, Emma asked, do you know how to fix the fan in my room? Nope, he said. She smiled. Good. Then you can try and fail, and Mama will say it's okay. They both laughed. Lena finally came down around sunset. She wore a simple wrap skirt and a tank top, her hair tied up with a scarf. She stood a few feet away watching them. Ethan stood slowly. She's incredible, he said softly. Lena looked at her daughter now rolling in the dirt with another child laughing like the world was perfect. She's everything, Lena replied. They stood in silence. I don't expect you to forgive me. Ethan began. Good, Lena said, because I haven't. He nodded, taking the blow. But she added what I saw today that was real. He turned to her eyes, vulnerable. I meant every second of it. Lena's gaze was steady. Then keep showing up. Not for me, for her. Ethan nodded, swallowing the emotion. I will. She turned to go, but then paused. You were good with the Yoware, she said without turning. He chuckled. She let me win once. No, Lena said, finally facing him again. She let you lose. And with that, she walked back toward her daughter, leaving Ethan standing there in the twilight, humbled, hopeful, and finally beginning to understand what it meant to be someone's father. The red dirt path leading back to Lena's village was quieter than she remembered, but not gentler. News had a way of traveling fast in small places, faster than motorbikes and louder than church bells. Especially when it came coated in gossip. Especially when it was about her. By the time Lena returned with Emma for a weekend visit, mostly for her mother's sake, who had missed the scent of the cassava fields and the sound of the 5 a.m. rooster, the village had already built its own version of her story. They called her the girl who went to the city and returned with sin braided into her hair. The children still smiled at Emma, curious, innocent, but their mothers whispered behind basins at the communal well. Aunties paused their basket weaving. Uncles leaned closer when her name was mentioned at the drinking shed. She left with nothing and came back with shame. She lives in Accra, but does she even have a husband? I hear she's working security like a man. They say her child doesn't even know her father's name. It hurt. More than Lena wanted to admit. Emma didn't understand why her grandmother was being treated coldly at the Saturday market, why fewer people greeted them at the village square. But Lena understood. She had seen this all before, when her father died, when her mother couldn't afford medicine, when she first wore shoes to school that didn't match. To them, poverty was one thing, but being different, that was worse. Lena tried to keep her head high, to pretend it didn't sting when no one invited her to sit beneath the mango tree, when the pastor's wife passed her without a nod, when the girl who used to braid her hair turned away in silence. Emma felt it too. She clung to Lena's hand tighter that afternoon as they walked home. Mama, she whispered, are we bad people? Lena stopped mid-step. Her heart cracked clean down the center. No, she said, kneeling. We are good people. People just don't always understand what they can't see. Then why don't they smile at us? Lena looked into her daughter's eyes, so full of questions the world wasn't ready to answer. Because sometimes the truth scares people. Later that night, after Emma had fallen asleep, Lena stood barefoot in the backyard. The sky above the village was brilliant with stars, unlike the city. The silence was loud. It pressed against her chest. She didn't hear the footsteps until they were right behind her. Ethan. He looked out of place in his navy shirt and leather sandals. Not city polished tonight, more grounded. The wind moved through his short curls. I thought you weren't coming until morning, Lena said, not turning. I came early, he said softly. I had something to ask. She turned to face him. He stepped closer, his hands behind his back. Do you remember the Festival of Voices? Lena blinked. Of course. Every harvest season. drumming, fire pits, dancing until your legs give out. Is it still held here? Not in years, she said. No one sponsors it anymore. Well, Ethan said, I'm bringing it back. She frowned. Why? He took a deep breath. Because I want this village to know who you are and what you mean to me and to Emma. Lena shook her head, arms crossing in defense. That won't change their minds. Maybe not, he said. But they'll hear the truth, even if just once. That Sunday, the village woke up to posters stapled to tree trunks and wooden fences. Festival of Voices returns, sponsored by Able Group. By afternoon, tents were being raised near the football field. Speakers wired to coconut trees. A stage built from planks borrowed from 3 different homes. The market women prepared spicy waki. The old drummers pulled out their goat-skin djembes. The children practiced fire dancing. No one quite knew what was happening. But they came. The whole village came. And at the heart of it, standing awkwardly on the small platform that creaked under his weight, was Ethan. Lena stood off stage in a simple yellow wrap dress, Emma in front of her, clutching her fingers. The sky glowed with evening amber. Ethan stepped up to the mic, took a deep breath. My name, he began, is Ethan Quay. Many of you know me as a businessman from Accra. But today, I stand before you as a man asking for something much more important than attention. I'm asking for forgiveness. The crowd murmured. Lena's mother, standing near the elders, held her breath. I wronged someone from this village, Ethan continued. Years ago, in ways I didn't fully understand until now. I caused pain. I walked away from something sacred, and she carried the weight alone, for too long. He looked directly at Lena. Lena Mensa. Gasps rippled through the crowd. She is not a shame to this village. She is a pillar. She is a mother, a warrior. And she raised a child, our child, without help, without complaint, without breaking. The crowd stilled. Some bowed their heads. Others looked at Lena with new eyes. Ethan reached into his pocket. I want to give something back. He pulled out the necklace. The ivory beads, the red cord, the small brass gourd. The one Lena thought she'd lost forever. He turned toward her and extended it. This, he said, once belonged to you. It was lost during a night I tried to forget. But you remembered, and you gave that memory a name. You raised that memory into a girl who is wiser than both of us. He kneeled on one knee in front of everyone and held out the necklace. I'm not asking to erase the past. I'm asking to stand in it with you. For Emma, for truth, for dignity. Lena didn't move. Tears blurred her vision. She looked at the necklace, then at Ethan, at the crowd, at Emma, who was watching wide-eyed, unsure but hopeful. Then she stepped forward, took the necklace, and placed it gently around Emma's neck. The crowd erupted in applause, not wild, but deep, moved, respectful, a shift, not just for Lena, but for every girl who had ever been shamed for surviving, for every mother who had ever carried more than her body could hold. That night, as the drums returned to the soil and the children danced barefoot through firelit circles, Lena stood beside Ethan and said quietly, "Thank you." And this time, she meant it. The dust had barely settled from the festival, but the ripples it left in the village were undeniable. People began to look at Lena differently, not with pity or suspicion, but with something resembling respect. The silence that had once greeted her at the market was replaced by soft nods, gentle greetings. The stares had softened. The judgment had quieted. But Lena was not a woman easily swayed by public approval. Her decisions were hers alone, shaped by years of solitude, sweat, and survival. So when Ethan stood beneath the mango tree the next morning, nervously toying with a folded piece of paper in his hand, she didn't let him speak first. If you want to be in Emma's life, she said, not turning from the laundry line, you'll have to start over. Ethan cleared his throat. Start over. Lena nodded, clipped a bedsheet to the line. You don't get to skip the beginning just because you've arrived late. I'm not asking to replace the years I missed. Good, she said, finally facing him, because you can't. But you can learn how to be her father. Not just her biological one. The real one. He nodded slowly. Where do I start? You walk her to school. You know the names of her stuffed animals. You learn the words to her bedtime songs. You remember her birthdays. You show up, Every single day. And what about us? He asked gently. Lena looked down at her hands, calloused from work, browned by sun. Then up at him. I'm not asking for a husband, she said softly. But maybe I'll grow into one if you keep showing me that love isn't just a feeling. It's a practice. It was not a confession. It was an invitation. One he accepted not with a kiss, but with his sleeves rolled up and his knees bent to the level of a child. The next morning, Ethan arrived with Emma's favorite breakfast couscous and spicy millet porridge piping hot. She beamed. He walked her to school, held her hand, listened as she explained the complicated social politics of 6-year-olds, how one classmate didn't share her pencils, and how another had stepped on her drawing. Ethan nodded solemnly. Do you want me to call the teacher? No, Daddy, she giggled. I'm not a baby. He grinned. Right, you're the boss. In the evenings, he helped Lena shell groundnuts for her mother's soup red. Emma her favorite folk tales, and learned the lullaby Lena sang, Do me, Makoma, do me. Love me, my heart, love me. He sang it off key. Emma laughed every time. Week by week, the lines of their relationship blurred, not in confusion, but in comfort. They weren't pretending. They were rebuilding. One afternoon, Emma ran into the house holding a piece of paper like it was treasure. Mama, Daddy, look. She spread the sheet on the table. A drawing done in bold, clumsy strokes showed 3 figures under a sun. A man with a tie, a woman with a yellow head wrap, and a little girl in a pink dress. Above them, in big letters, it said, My family. Lena stared at it for a long time. Her throat tightened. Her fingers touched the corner of the paper like it might crumble. Ethan saw the tears fill her eyes before she could wipe them away. Hey, he said gently, she's the artist. You're just the masterpiece. That night, Lena held Emma a little longer than usual after bedtime. Kissed her forehead twice instead of once. Then walked out to the porch where Ethan was watching fireflies blink through the trees. She drew us, Lena whispered, as if still afraid it wasn't real. She sees what we're building, he replied. Even before we do. They sat in silence, the good kind. The kind where hearts begin to breathe together. A few weeks later, the construction began. Ethan had spoken with Lena's mother and asked quietly, respectfully, if she'd allow him to build her a new home. Something sturdier than the one-room clay structure she'd lived in for decades. She resisted at first, not wanting to be seen as someone who begged. But he promised it was a gift, not charity. A thank you. For raising Lena. For enduring. Within days, builders from the city arrived alongside village craftsmen Ethan had paid in advance. They worked side by side, laying bricks, mixing mortar, raising walls that would shelter not just a woman, but a story. Emma helped paint the shutters sky blue. Lena chose yellow curtains to catch the morning light. When it was finished, the house stood tall at the edge of the cassava field, surrounded by marigolds Emma insisted on planting. The villagers watched. They murmured. But they also began to see. At the next market day, a group of teenage girls approached Lena at her stand. Auntie one said shyly, How did you survive? Lena looked up startled. Everyone said you were ruined. But now they say you're the strongest woman in the village. Lena smiled. Not bitter. Not proud, just full. I didn't survive because I was strong, she said. I became strong because I had no choice. The girls nodded. One whispered, We want to be like you. And for the first time in years, Lena felt something shift inside her. Not shame, not guilt. Legacy. That night, after Emma fell asleep, Ethan took Lena's hand and pulled her outside under the stars. No grand gestures, he said. Just this. He handed her a small box. Inside was a silver ring, not flashy. Elegant, understated, like her. Lena raised an eyebrow. Didn't I say no skipping steps? He grinned. I'm not asking you to marry me, yet. She narrowed her eyes, yet. Just asking if I can keep building this life with you. One day at a time. She slipped the ring onto her finger, let it settle there, like it belonged. Then let's keep building, she whispered. And the stars above them blinked in quiet agreement. The rain came the night before, soft, warm, almost ceremonial. Not the kind that swept roofs away or filled rivers with rage, but the kind that kissed the soil, whispered through the leaves, and turned the village paths to soft clay. By dawn, the earth had stilled, and by late morning, the heart of the village pulsed with color. Strings of kente cloth fluttered from tree to tree. Women moved with grace, draped in vivid wrappers, heads crowned with intricate jewel. Men wore smocks and tunics, slippers slapping against red mud as they laughed and greeted one another. Children dashed through the alleys, their faces streaked with chalk symbols of protection and joy. The Okiam, the village linguist and ceremonial speaker, stood at the head of the gathering under the baobab tree, holding a carved staff taller than himself. His voice boomed through the clearing as he recited ancient verses of love, unity, and legacy. Today was no ordinary celebration. It was a betrothal. And not just any proposal, but one that had taken the entire village by storm. Because it wasn't only a man proposing to a woman. It was a man asking for a place in a history he'd once abandoned, and a woman daring to let him return. Lena stood to the side of the gathering, surrounded by a semicircle of elders and family. Her mother sat proudly on a low stool beside her, wrapped in new cloth, cheeks wet with joy. Emma clutched Lena's hand, eyes wide with both delight and confusion, half understanding the gravity of the moment, half just excited by the drums and dancing. Ethan stood at the center, adorned not in a suit but in traditional Agbada rich blue with gold embroidery. Around his neck hung a beaded strand of coral and ivory, gifted to him by the village's eldest elder, a symbol of restored lineage. He carried no microphone. His words needed no amplification. He stepped forward slowly, heart-thudding palms surprisingly dry. When he knelt, the murmurs quieted. Even the wind held its breath. He didn't read from a speech. He didn't clear his throat. He simply looked up at the woman who had rewritten every rule in his life. "Lena Mensa," he began. "I came into your life as a stranger, a shadow, a mistake I didn't know I'd made." Lena's eyes shimmered, and somehow he continued, "You gave me more than a second chance. You gave me a family, a daughter, a home. And you never asked me to earn it. You just asked me to show up." He paused, breath hitching. "I don't want to be perfect. I just want to be present. Not only when it's easy, but especially when it's hard. I want to learn and fail and rise beside you, as your partner, as your friend, as the man who will never again walk away from what matters." The Okiyame stepped forward, blessing his words, in the name of tradition of ancestors and of love not born of wealth, but of wound and wonder. Lena stepped forward. Tears streamed freely now, but her hands were steady as she pulled Emma closer. The girl held something in her palm, the necklace, the same one Lena had worn 6 years ago. The one lost, then returned. Its ivory beads now restored its brass gourd polished by time and meaning. Emma looked up at Ethan. "Mama says this necklace used to protect her heart," she whispered. Ethan knelt again, this time to Emma's level. "Would you let me help protect it now?" Emma smiled and nodded. With tiny fingers, she lifted the necklace and placed it gently around her own neck. Gasps moved through the crowd, not for the gesture, but for what it symbolized. Legacy. Healing. Circle closed. Lena reached for Ethan's hand. "I accept," she said simply. No fanfare, no conditions. Just truth. Just now. The drums began again softly at first, then louder, cascading into rhythms that called the villagers to dance. Ethan and Lena were pulled into the center, surrounded by children who clapped, elders who chanted, and neighbors who now watched with reverence, not rumor. It wasn't about redemption. It was about recognition. This was their beginning. Later that day, as the sun dipped low and the fire pits began to crackle, Lena, Ethan, and Emma walked hand in hand down the winding path that led from the village to the edge of the forest. The clouds had returned gray and gentle. And then, the first drop, then another. They didn't run. They didn't speak. They simply walked together beneath the blessing of rain. Emma danced ahead, arms stretched, necklace bouncing gently against her chest. Ethan reached for Lena's hand. She took it, and in the quiet, Lena's voice broke the stillness. "You know," she said, "I used to think that night, the night we met, was the worst night of my life." Ethan glanced sideways, and now she looked up at the sky. Rain kissed her cheeks. "I think it was the beginning of something bigger than either of us." Ethan squeezed her hand. Fate. No, she said something stronger. The camera would rise now, if this were a film slowly pulling back, revealing the trio beneath the trees, framed by green hills and gold fields. The red of the earth rich beneath their feet. The necklace glinting like fire against Emma's chest. A voice would narrate, not Lena's, not Ethan's, but something older, something timeless. Some mistakes are not punishment. They are passage. Some meetings are not accidents. They are written. And some families are not born from ease, but from fire. When the rain falls, it does not ask who is worthy. It simply nourishes the roots willing to receive. This was not a story of perfect love. It was a story of choosing each other again, and again, and again. Fade to black. The music, a soft blend of flute and drum, lingers like a heartbeat. The wild of Ghana stretches wide, and peace finally finds a place to live.